completely bowled over because the first draft, like all first drafts, has its problems and things that don't work and it's all a bit complicated.
Yeah.
It's a very, very complicated story, and partly because Aristu Jar, the Prime Minister, weaves this very complex trap for Kirkpatrick, partly to trap the British, but partly also to trap his political rival Mir Alam. And I had forgotten the complexity of it.
It's
and
so complex.
Of course, with a film script, you've got far less space to do all this complex stuff, that you have to boil it down to a single glance or a couple of lines. And reading the final script, or the current script, that Nick has been working on for a year now, all those problems are ironed out. The complexity of it becomes completely apparent, and it's explained with great ease. And it's got terrific economy. The characters come out through very little dialogue. You get a very clear idea of who they are. I'm particularly delighted that one of the minor characters in the book, who is my ancestor, there's a character in the book called James Dalrymple, who marries, like Kirkpatrick, marries a Begum. He marries Muti Begum, who is the descendant of Nur Jahan, through whom I have a tiny trickle of Mughal blood. She is one of Nur Jahan's sister's descendants. And the Dalrymples, Muti and James, play only a very peripheral role in the book, but they're actually fairly central to the script. So they've been promoted,
yes.
Which is very nice. So I'm very pleased to see him there.
Yes. They're an established, successful family of mixed race.
Yes. What's interesting is that what was scandalous about the Kirkpatrick thing was emphatically not the fact that it was an interracial love affair. The problem was that she was promised to somebody else, and she was the Prime Minister's niece, that it was diplomatically sensitive, and he got her pregnant before marriage.
Yes.
So it's not a racial problem. It is it's a premarital sex problem. Right?
Yes.
And that comes out very clearly. So the Dalrymples, however, are the kind of perfect mixed race family in the story.
Yes.
In the script. And there is a very sad story which is not in the script, what happens to them, but it's worth just telling a little bit. Muti Begum has 3 boys and a girl with James Dalrymple. And as fate would have it, and you see this today in many mixed-race families, that the kids are often completely different colorings. That, one is a blonde and 2 are very dark, or 2 are very dark and 1 has blue eyes. Or it often happens that the genes come up in very strange configurations. And in this particular generation, there were 3 boys, all of whom were very fair, and they were brought up as Christians, sent off to Madras, where they were educated in the English manner, and eventually shipped off back to home, in inverted commas, where they were reintegrated into the Scottish gentry, and I'm the result of that story. They played golf, shot pheasants, and did all the things Scots toffs do. But their sister is too dark to escape detection, in the phrase of their father's will. And she is brought up as a Hyderabadi Shia Muslim. She's married off to one of her father's Muslim Subadar officers. And then the officer dies. And she's left a widow in her 30s or 20s. And she has to write to her brothers in Scotland to try and get money because she's penniless. And although she's educated, she's obviously literate only in Persian. And the letter survives in the family archives. And she writes it asking for money. And she writes it in Persian and has to go to a bazaar letter writer or some third party who writes a kind of a rather crude English translation above her perfectly fluent Persian script. And the letter was kept, so presumably the brothers remembered her and sent her money. It wasn't thrown into a ball and burnt in the fire. So I hope that they did send money, but that's all we have, that one letter.
Yes. Yes.
But anyway.
It was a cruel distinction.
A cruel distinction, too dark to escape detection. But I was bowled over by the script, and I think that the combination of Nick's amazing script, Rafe Fiennes' direction, and Frank Dolger's commercial abilities shown in Game of Thrones, I think bode very well for this project, and I'm very pleased that it's got as far as it has.
Very good. Good.
So over to you guys. Any queries and questions? Can we have a guy with a microphone?
Afternoon, William. Afternoon, Nick.
Hello.
I'm a budding, aspiring scriptwriter, and it's great to be here. I just wanted to ask you something. Some really great stories have been translated into films, right? From 70s when Mario Puzo's The Godfather was made into a film. Closer home, we have Vikas Swarup's Q&A, which was made into Slumdog Millionaire. It did pretty well, I would like to believe.
Pretty well.
Has it ever happened that, or probably, can a film ever be made into a book? For the duration of the film. For example, there was a film that was just released, I think last year, called Gangs of Wasipur. I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah. It spanned like 2 films, a film and a sequel. Has a writer ever thought that probably watching a film, it's so riveting, it's an original screenplay, maybe it would make more sense to write a book? And would a writer then take writing liberties rather than a cinematic liberty to translate into a book?
Well, I think occasionally it has happened, as you say, that what almost always happens is the other way around, because film has a great appetite for story, and fiction is a great resource for it. But I am actually struggling to think of a single case in which an artistically successful novel has come directly out of a film. I have a feeling that novelists these days watch films very carefully, and that filmic structure is becoming much more appealing to the way that people structure their novels. But actually, truthfully, I can't think of a single instance in which there has been a successful move in that direction. I'm not sure why that is. Any ideas?
Yes, I had a question. It was clear when you were describing the process that you went through in developing the script that the entire setting and the beauty of all of it is critical. The daily life, the bathing, the so on and so forth, is in your mind when you're writing the script. Is that fair to say?
It is in my mind, absolutely, and I do, as I write, I see the film, I'm transcribing what I see in my mind, but at the same time I have to do an enormous amount of research to make sure that I'm not imagining anachronistic things.
Of course, but then my question is, how much of a sense of ownership as a writer and a script writer do you have over it when you then let it go and it becomes designed by somebody else?
Well, this is in a way, this is the joy and the tragedy of screenwriting, because a script, although I think of a script as a piece of writing, a genuine piece of writing in the same way as a poem, that's not what most people think of. They think of them as blueprints towards something else. My previous experience where I wrote a script and it was then made was, I was fortunate, I suppose, but it was a delight to collaborate with people who shared the vision of what the film could be. So I felt that the screenplay was a collaboration which was respected and used as the basis for the film itself. And of course, that's the ideal. We hear many, many stories of the absolute opposite of that. And, touch wood, I have yet to experience that. But I do write the film for myself, but I do write it also for the director, because the director has to have a manual of instructions, of images and of scenes and of sequences and of dialogue, which he or she will use then to direct the film. So it has to also have a function. And sometimes I think back to what it must have been, not that I'm comparing myself, but for Shakespeare, for example, where the play was not really considered to be a great literary artifact. It was a thing that was useful towards the theatrical performance.
There's also the question of what the relationship of the writer is to a film, and
yes.
It's a famously fraught one. And many writers hate the films that are made of their books and think their book has been murdered. I'm so far very lucky that everything I've seen about the script. I mean, the great danger with what was attractive as a historian working on this story was that it was so very novelistic, that it had all that. While you had the perfect story arc there, but none of it was fiction. It was a true story. There were the letters, there were the reports, there were the spies, there were the examinations, and James and his brother William wrote to each other often twice, 3 times a week for a process of 10 years. So it's all there in black and white. But I think it's very important as a writer to steer clear of the film and let them get on with it. The book is my version.
Yes.
The only thing I would say is that if the film comes out and if it looks as if it's going to be a big movie, so to speak, there's something I've always wanted to do, which was White Moghuls, uniquely of my books, is the only one of my books I'd like to have a sort of second run at, in that could never quite make up my mind when I was writing the book. Was it the White Moghuls or was it the White Mughal? Was it about all these guys like Fraser and Octoloni and Gardner and Palmer, all these guys who were out there, or was it actually the story of Kirkpatrick? And I think I made the decision I did to do the wider story as well, and tried to have both, but it's slightly two books in one. And if there is a big movie, it would be a rather nice opportunity to do a cut-down film version, which only tells the story of Kerr and Kirkpatrick and abandons all the rest of them. And I think it's the only one of my books I think that I would like to cut down quite significantly. There was a French edition that was very successful, which was called The White Moghul. And they cut away everyone else and they concentrated on the love story, being French. And it was very successful, and it was very tight. It was a very tight thing, and I'd love to do an English version in a sense of the French one.
Yes, get it translated back.
Translated back into...
Well, we look forward to that.
Sorry, I have... It's me here.
Hello, hi.
Hello. But this isn't as much as a question as it is... I sit here with a great sense of relief, because having read The White Moghuls, being an actor, the first thing that struck me was that what a marvelous film this would make. And I immediately thought of it in terms of a serial, something that's a mini-series would probably be about 15 one-hour episodes.
There was a theory that was what it would become, but in the end it is a movie.
And recently when I saw that Nick was going to be here, was going to convert it into a film, I was practically expecting to see a writer on a white horse with his really large fountain pen. However, I'm very sort of relieved to know that you're going to be dealing with this, because from what you've said is very encouraging, and I'm pretty certain it's going to be a very fascinating picture. And I, for one, am going to call my agent immediately. Thank you very much.
That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Sunil. I just had a question for the both of you. The first question is, I would like to know your take on Scottish independence. And secondly, I really liked your book, The City of Gins. So I just wanted to know what, you haven't mentioned the pre-Islamic period in great detail. As in, there is a mention of painted grey civilization, etc. And for Mr. Nick, I wanted to know which genre is more appealing to you in script writing.
Nick, do you want to go first?
Yes. Well, genre for a writer is a very helpful thing, but it's also a tremendously strong current which can draw you into something a little bit second-hand. So my approach to genre is to take what I need from it, but to try to subvert it and try to use it for other purposes. I mean, my first film was about a father and son. It was a kind of love story, and this is also a love story. So I'm very drawn to stories about love, but I'm also very drawn to stories about characters who make enormous, perilous, emotional journeys across worlds. So I think those are the two genres I like. And of course, as you write, you have all these other films in your mind which belong within the genre. But the danger is that you write the formula of genre, and that's a terrible thing. You must never do that.
On Scottish independence, I am a Scot. I was born in Scotland. But I think we 4 million Scots ride the English horse very, very well at the moment. The current Prime Minister is called Cameron. The previous one's called Brune. The one before that's called Blair. We've had a run of Scots running the English. And I think it's a bit silly to go off and run our own ship, considering what a mess we made, for example, of the Royal Bank of Scotland. If we were independent now, we'd be as poor as Iceland. I think we should continue to run England in the manner we've been doing, is my theory. As for City of Jinns, there is very little known about the pre-Islamic history of Delhi. There are only fragments of pot, a couple of legends. I could have done more with Prithviraj Chauhan, but it is a dark period, and there's not much that is known. More is known now than was known 20 years ago when the book was written. There's been quite a lot of digging in the site of Lalkot, and one could fill that section out now if one was rewriting that book. But the story I was telling was really the Sultanate, the Mughals, the East India Company. That was the stuff that was interesting me at that point.
Mr. Wilrumpel, I'm sorry, we'll have to end this session. Mr. Wilrumpel, Mr. Drake, thank you so much for being here.
Okay.
They'll be available outside for you to discuss any more points. I'm sorry we cannot take any more questions. We come back later with a topic being the importance of being 2014. This is India's tipping point election. Thank you for being a great audience. See you then.